It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday, and this Feedback Friday, I'm recording on Wednesday again, because, again, busy week. But this is it's something that kind of came out of the Discord. It was like discussions about the discussions, but also one comment tied in, so I was able to do that. Because, I mean, Monday, Tuesday were just lovely discussions about Warhammer 40k. And I am so grateful to those guys who, showed up and did it. Because, one, they really knew their shit right off the top of their head, which is always so cool to me. It also, I think, cut some of the stigma of the attitudes that some people have towards Warhammer 40k fans, which really have nothing to do with the material and everything to do with the specific type of... Every fandom has them, but for some odd reason, the extreme gatekeepers have been centered in Warhammer 40k fandom, and the people I know who like this stuff and who I talk to about it, they're not like that. So I'm really glad to be able to, share that. I love the men liking stuff. Everyone's so different. Next week's is going to be on Superman. That's a good one. But yeah, it's nice to just be able to share that. And every time the people in the panels have a really good time, the people watching the positivity really have a good time. And, that's the whole point. And we did test how to introduce a woman to Warhammer 40k in one move, Sanguinius. We did test it this week, and it was successful. Comparisons to the vampire list stat were made. So that was good science. Just joking on the science part. But it's August. It's the end of August, and I find that this sort of late July into August, there tends to be this I don't know, uptick in kind of mental health pressure. I guess because the days are starting to get shorter again, and I don't know, the heat. I find that around this time, and then late January, early February, people start to be struggling more. And some of the stuff in the news has not helped. There's been a lot of stuff about, game content, and I mean, Trump signed an executive order against flag burning. And on the one hand, it's academic for a lot of people, but that is an erosion of free speech protections. And I know a lot of the people who watch my content feel very, very strongly about it. And the term censorship it's so hard to talk about because the word means different things to different people. And I have a particular standard that I use because it was drilled into me when I worked at video game websites. But let me do the help support this channel thing, and then I'll get into it because I almost forgot to do it. Help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK. You will notice that I've changed the goal on the coffee page. My laptop is going to become non-functional. Well, it's not safe to use it because it won't run Windows 11. So I need to get a new one. And the goal is not the entire price of the laptop. It's a piece of it. But, any help you can give me to not go into debt to do that again, because I just had to pay for vet bills for one of my cats. And then there was the roof earlier. And I need to get the laptop this month so that I can get it set up, because there is no way for me to I want to get a complete repave of my desktop for Windows 11. The boot times are slow, and I am concerned about what the upgrade will do, but it's got to go in, because I want just a fresh boot drive, everything. This is what I do with major upgrades. But in order to do that, I need a working laptop so I can continue to work. So it's like, this part of the process has to get done in the next couple weeks so the other part of the process can happen. I know, serious first world problems, but this is what I'm trying to do. So any help you could give would be greatly appreciated. So with the censorship thing, when I worked at certain game websites, we were not allowed to use the term censorship to apply to, like, websites not running a piece of content. That was curation. Censorship is often a government thing. You can say corporate censorship. Yes, corporations have gotten so big now that I personally believe that corporate censorship, is real, but I was not allowed to use that term when I worked for certain websites. And that's where I learned that censorship doesn't mean the same thing to different people. And I understand why the websites took that position, because they said we can't have our right to decide what we publish hamstrung or undermined by our own writers. All right, fair. That makes sense to me, right? I do think that freedom of speech means that people who make stuff have the right to include the content they want, but also not include the content they want. People shouldn't be compelled to include something because people are going to freak out if they don't. And unfortunately, gaming has become this exercise of who freaks out the loudest wins, with exceptions. And I think that it's a race to the bottom. And I also think that it's really affecting people's mental health. And there's this, the reason I talked about what is and is not therapy is because, seek help was a dismissal for a while there on Twitter. It was like a dunk back when it was Twitter. And I never liked that because when I was concerned about people and I was like, you know what? Maybe professional help's in order. People treated that as an insult or a dismissal, and it wasn't. I've been saying, who hurt you? A lot regarding things. And let's face it, when people completely melt down over a hobby, it's not about the hobby. It's about the sense of safety and control associated with that hobby. And that's when people start going, oh, poor baby, all that stuff. And no, we all need places where we feel like somebody's not going to push us in to something we don't want to do. The problem we live in a series of cultures that are so actively anti-boundaries that people are regressing further and further and further and further into media as a safe space. And, unfortunately, the X-Pro years in gaming were an example of those boundaries being, actively destroyed because, there is a line where trash talk just becomes being verbally abusive and bullying. And to me, trash talk is when, outside of esports, like when it's just regular people playing, everybody's in on it. Like everybody's consenting to it. And there should be an ability for someone to go, you know what? That's over the line. Can you knock it off? But I remember times playing with, For me, it was always friends' boyfriends who would just act like bloody idiots and not knock it off when it was pretty clear other people did not find it as funny as they did. And, you know, the girlfriends were always in a situation where, I mean, back then, if you said to a guy, hey, can you not do that in front of my friends? You're supposed to support me. And so it put her in a bad spot, and it put, you know, the other players in the multiplayer session in a bad spot. And what eventually happened is, you know, we played with that couple less and less because he wouldn't knock it off. And, you know, it was that I'm not going to be censored. This isn't censorship, pal. We're telling you everybody else is not having fun here. Cut it the fuck out. I'm not gonna have rights. That's not what censorship means. When someone's going, hey, cut it out, that's not funny. That's not censoring you. That's giving you an opportunity to, you know, show that you respect that other person by respecting their comfort level. And I see it at least every couple of weeks where I'll tell somebody, yeah, okay, let's not do this. And there'll be this slow simmer where they'll start searching for a way to escalate a conflict that is not there. Because like, hey, let's just not. That's pretty mild, right? But they'll start spinning. And they'll start introducing things that did not exist there. Like, I'm not going to apologize for something I didn't do. Well, saying, okay, let's not is not asking for anybody to apologize. It's just stop doing going forward. Thanks. Nobody has to be sorry. Just don't do it anymore. Not the same thing. But then it's, well, my ex did this to me. And oh, so now you're taking out what one woman did on you on other, and the problem gets worse and worse and worse and worse. And I do think that this is sort of old concepts of a lot of people have very deep-seated beliefs that they don't really recognize are there about the role of the opposite sex. And you notice I'm saying the opposite sex, not men or women, because there's different ways that this manifests where, you know, women treat men unfairly because of social stereotypes, and men treat women unfairly because of social stereotypes. And they don't do it to their own group because they're a member of that group. They know everybody in that group is not the same. They don't have the experience of being part of the other group. And people who don't neatly fit into one category or another, like non-binary people are not immune to this. Trans people are not immune to this. But when you really address it in yourself, you know, for me, coming out of radical feminist circles and going, you know what, this is male bashing and I'm going to stop. Wow, that's like ripping a curtain down. And all of a sudden you see how pervasive it is. And you get ostracized fairly quickly when you start going, you know, guys, two wrongs don't make a right. But I stand by what I do because, you know, people listen to me that won't listen to that crowd. So, hey, I'll take it, even if it makes me unpopular in some places. But it is a real thing. And that idea that, you know, men are just supposed to validate women and make you feel beautiful and you know, it's why that third season of The Mandalorian, when everybody was just, you have my sword to Bo-Katan, no matter how much of a fuck up she was, I'm like, no. And apparently that role destroyed Katie Sackhoff. She said that because she didn't know how to relate to the character. And it's like, guess what? No woman can relate to that character. Because the idea that a bunch of men who have a ton of reason to distrust you and not be sure about your leadership are just going to line up behind you even when you're wrong, not only is that not life, that's not healthy. And when everything is fucking mental health culture, when everything is therapy culture, when nothing is life, that's what you get. It's the same problem with the John Kent Superman stuff, where Superman, instead of, well, I'll save it for the men liking stuff because we talked about this, but you know, the idea that people aren't allowed to falter, to have concerns, to be worried, to be apprehensive about things, that's just not life. Just because somebody doesn't agree with how you're going about something or has questions, it doesn't mean they don't support you as a person. The fact that we got to the point where people were claiming in large numbers that playing Hogwarts Legacy harmed them personally. And again, I didn't buy that game, I didn't play that game, and I told people why. But I knew people who did. And cool, right? The same way I've been bored to tears with Grand Theft Auto games since Grand Theft Auto. I played San Andreas. 4 was a depressing experience, and 5 was that same kind of affluent white male misery that I know some people really connected to it. I didn't. And fine. I tried the multiplayer. It was fun with the right people. No game is for everyone. And that's the thing. You can't be anti-censorship and then anything that makes you feel personally bad, you freak out and try to stomp dead. And when I say that, people are like, well, I can't do anything. It's not the same. Everybody thinks, unless you're a grandiose narcissist, most people underestimate the power they have to hurt other people. Most people do. They think if they don't mean to, then it shouldn't hurt. And that's just not how life works. I say things all the time that were not intended to hurt anybody. And it hit somebody sideways in a way I absolutely could not predict. And they told me, and I'll often come here on Feedback Friday and go, yeah, okay, that wasn't my intention. I'm saying this because if it bothered one person, it probably bothered other people. That is a good thing, right? I am glad when I am able to do that, because the best way to show you mean no harm is when someone gets hurt, care. Because hurt and harm are not the same thing. And the sense of scope, the sense of context has gotten lost because it became this race to perform harm, because there's this belief that that's the standard, right? Instead of, how about we just let game companies make the games they want to make, and we're not going to love every change, and that's okay. There's so bloody much to play that I don't have to love every Gears of War game anymore. You know, I don't have to love Halo, even though I was big into Gears, more Gears than Halo, but I really liked Halo 2 back in the day. I don't have to be into those franchises anymore because, oh my God, I am so behind. And that doesn't mean I think people are faking it. I think that there is this psychological manipulation going on through the fact that people are getting their information through video content like this instead of text, which obviously there's a lot less information, a lot less stimulus. Text doesn't have music, text doesn't have facial expressions, text doesn't have inflection, right? And so it's just the information, and it makes a big difference, because no matter who you are going to empathize with people you see as like you against people who remind you of people who hurt you in the past. So in gaming, the minute you get a guy saying, I am being censored, they're abusing the system against me, there's this instant, right? And you see yourself in that poor downtrodden soul, and it hijacks your critical thinking, because it's all emotion. There's this instant emotional connection. And that's why I tend to, put checks on emotionally loaded language. And it's amazing how many people go, okay, that's true, but the anchor is already embedded in them, right? That hook is already in. And it's so much harder to get the hook out than it is to get it in there in the first place. Yeah, it's exhausting, right? I have to do it all the time. Whenever there's some story about some poor woman who's been, with a tale of woe about being abused by someone, I have to go, all right, I have to slow down and I have to think about it critically. Because just because when I talked about things I experienced, I was not believed, doesn't mean that, and I knew I was telling the truth, doesn't mean that everybody with a story is telling the truth. Let's slow my roll. And if I can do that, I expect that of everybody. I have a goddamn trauma condition. So if I can do it, it's fair for me to expect that standard from everyone. And this is where the comment comes in that I wanted to focus. Yeah, 22 minutes into the video. It's one of those. So possibly an example of linguistic treadmill that usually means, this is about the what is and isn't therapy video from Wednesday. Possibly an example of linguistic treadmill, a term usually reserved for the euphemism treadmill, but also the concept applies to hyperbole, insults, etc. What once was just something you like became something that's good for you. Then it became self-care, then therapy. Eventually, it may become something else. As the term therapy gets more diluted, more to the point, I worry that muddying the line between actual therapy and therapy ultimately condones self-medication for dealing with serious problems. Not that the idea of self-medication needs any help. We're well beyond epidemic in that regard, sadly. And I think that's accurate. I also think that the idea of avoidance or displacement of life, which is scary, with games that aren't, that's something we need to watch. And that's why I'm really concerned about people treating games like living things that can be killed, because they're not, but people are having that emotional response, and that emotional response is valid. We just have to figure out how to make this healthy as opposed to something that is an avoidant compulsion. Because if there's stuff in life that you are avoiding, that's not the fault of the game. And I'm trying to get out ahead of some of this stuff, because we're getting literature now. Because of course, no matter how many times we get science to say games aren't the problem, people keep wanting games to be the problem, because people are looking for something to ban, to erase, to get rid of, to crush. And that solves the problem with their child, right? As opposed to, no, you've got to invest in your kid or your friend or your other family member. You have to treat them like a human being with subjectivity and feelings. You can't crush the inconvenient parts of them and expect that to work. But I see this cycle again and again and again. There's a problem with the youth. Let's ban shit. Let's age gate shit. Instead of what the data says is actually going to help, which is let them play on their own, outside, unsupervised. You can check in, but don't be standing there the whole time, right? And unstructured. They've actually shown that kids would rather just free play outside than play a video game. But the problem is that all their play in the real world is so structured and supervised that they have no sense of autonomy. So if you want the kids to be okay, do that. Oh, but that means the parent relinquishing control, and that means the parent needing to self-regulate their own catastrophic thinking. Oh no, we're just going to ban the games. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. We cannot ban our way to happiness, because all we're doing is taking away the joy and not replacing it with anything. You can't replace joy with misery. You have to replace joy with joy. And it's gotten to the point where people aren't even enjoying the games they play anymore. They're going into them looking for something to react to. And I've heard from a lot of people saying, I'm always looking for something now. I'm always waiting for the next shoe to drop. And I said to them, yeah, that's what these tactics do. When these well-organized, well-funded organizations hit multiple countries with the same complaints and the same tactics all at once, it seems like things come from everywhere, and it makes it seem like they have more power than they do. That's different from, what's going on in the US government right now, where that is actual power. There's a lot of misreporting about why these things are happening, why these games are getting yanked. The best I can find on the whole, Steam and itch thing, that the issue isn't the adult nature of the games. The issue is the lack of an ESRB rating. Because the ESRB rating is something of a stamp against, some sort of illegal activity going on. There's a third party, and it just seems like they don't trust Steam's vetting system enough. And, as somebody who's filled out the paperwork for Steam's vetting system, I don't necessarily trust it either. It's just pay us $125. There you go. And the question is what to do about that, right? The credit card companies are legally required to do due diligence against illegal activity. And so, you get one kid trafficked via Roblox. Well, now we got a problem, because it's a kid. Similarly, if there's any suspicions of money laundering through these cheap adult games, they set up a bunch of accounts that filter dirty money, pay a bunch of money into these shit sex games. Now it's clean, and the numbers aren't huge enough to probably trip anything, but you splatter 100 of these things out there. Because let's face it, as a lot of people said, these games are garbage. And I'm not saying there's proof it's happening. It would just be a tactic that is possible and plausible. And again, without any sort of external check. And last I checked, when I looked into my own game that I got screwed on, it costs about $1,000 to rate a game with the ASRB. That's not much. Now, if you're just doing it for quick money and you don't expect a lot of sales, okay, that might be cost prohibitive. It's too much of a loss. But, I don't understand why people, when you're spending the amounts of money even a cheap game costs to make, an extra $1,000 is something I think is reasonable to budget in. Now, some people have a philosophical issue with a rating requirement, but there's no ideal utopian solution here. I hear you, but it's a question of what's the best solution. And this is where we tend to disagree. And the problem is now that for all the complaining about, the left in gaming spaces, the sort of anti-wokes now have become just as bad, where if you don't agree with them 100%, they freak out and dogpile you and call you all these names. It's not persuasive, and it's wrecked some good ideas. Because I do agree that game makers doing things because they feel like they have to or because they're afraid is not the same as a sincere, artistic expression. And again, there will never be a sincere artistic expression because AAA games are expensive and they need to make money. There can only be so many Hideo Kojimas. And that one came up because we were talking about, smoking in Japanese games and how in 2020, this was on the Discord, in 2020, Japan put in very, very rigid anti-smoking laws. And so now you're not, like in the Trails of the Sky remake, there's, a lot less of Neil chain smoking. And I don't like the change in that character because they've cleaned him up, and to me he was supposed to be that really unpleasant, bitter reporter guy, even though apparently he's only supposed to be 30. But I worked with those guys, and they were always really unpleasant at first because they were so bitter. But if you were able to kind of see past that and learn from them, they could teach you a lot because they've been around. And there does seem to be this rejection of that kind of knowledge, that kind of life experience. And people are so focused on what they think should be that they're rejecting what is. And that's not a great way to feel like balanced and happy. At some point, we have to accept reality and work with it instead of not feeling safe until everything is catering to our comfort. And I'm not saying that, everyone watching this, everyone with concerns is that. There's just too much of that. It's too easy to hit certain buttons in gaming and make people go crazy. And like bad crazy. And because it's so easy, I'm concerned that people are doing it for clicks and views and therefore money instead of, sounding the alarm judiciously and cautiously and sticking to facts. And I feel so bad for my moderators lately because people have been personalizing the moderators going, can you please support your claims? And it's not personal. We try to keep things fact-based just because that is the best way to self-regulate in this absolutely crazy world. Like, take what's there, don't extrapolate, don't exaggerate, don't minimize. Deal with the facts. And there's been a couple times this week where people have calmed down when I've gone like bit by bit, like, okay, so what I understand you're upset about is this. And your issue is this. And wait for them to go, that's right. That's right. And it's like, okay, well, how do you square this part with this part? And to these people's credit, they recognize that, all right, yes, this isn't, either it doesn't make any sense or this isn't the most likely solution. And in situations like that, I really do believe that people just want someone to listen to them. The problem is, in the span of YouTube, I am not important enough to count as listening. This happens to me all the time. We just want someone to listen. We just want someone to listen. Well, I'm listening. We just want someone important to listen. It's like, gee, thanks, guys. You can't control that. You know, these things ebb, these things flow. I was playing D&D during the moral panic in the 1980s. I was playing Mortal Kombat and Doom in the moral panic in the 93, 94. Where I'm at always seems to be the site of a moral panic. Now it's gaming and being, pro one, medical privacy, two, trans rights. Every single fucking thing. It's like, and I'm consistent on this stuff. It's just, look, I'm not completely anti-regulation. I just want it to be limited and rational regulation. And let's make it harm, not hurt feelings. Because hurt feelings, quite frankly, is good for you to an extent. Hence, this commenter and the me ironically expanding the definition of self-medication, right? Learning how to hurt and be okay is a very important skill. Learning how to be uncomfortable and be okay is a very important skill. And I do it every day. People fire shit in my comments, and some of them, they're personal. They're people taking digs at me. And I nuked one this week because the fucking screen name was KK Kersner. It was fucking Stalker Chan. It's like, you come and KKK me? How was that even possible? Like, why does YouTube allow that? That's the question for the ages, right? Like, why? Why does YouTube still allow a screen name with KKK in it? But that girl is anti-Semitic as anything. So that was sort of like, yep, nuke, bye. And does it sting? Yeah. Does it feel unfair that people are still allowed to do something like just openly hateful that way? Yeah. Do I realize you gotta cope with it sometimes? Also, yeah. And that's why I'll fire up Death Stranding and like feel understood and the wholesome weirdness of that game. And okay. I know how to self-regulate. I know how to self-soothe. Stalker Chan does not. That's her problem. That's why she's obsessed with me. And she is intent to tear me down because she doesn't like herself. And every time she sees me get something even remotely good, she can't deal. And she's not the only one. And hating me, freaking out, doing shit like that is not going to make her happier. In the long term, it makes her more miserable, and she just blames me, and the cycle begins again. And what people like this don't realize is if it was working, you wouldn't be so scared and miserable and angry all the time. No one is doing that to you. You are making a series of choices. Things can be hard, but not miserable. When you get into the Buddhist concept of suffering, that's what it is. To hurt is unavoidable. To suffer is. And we live in a suffering society when everything has to be bloody therapy. Nothing can just be friendship or caring or kindness. And you know what is the only way that you can self-produce oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone? Acts of kindness. Just to be kind, not to get anything out of it. It's really the only proven way to stimulate that on your own without another person to hug, right? Or a cat to pet. Scout's right here. Oxytocin, right, Scouty? You are oxytocin man. No, you are Scout. But Scout's down here. But, I think I'm going to do more on this because I think the commenter is right. That this self-medication aspect, this displacement stuff, it has a role, but you can get dependent on it. And there's a lot of unnecessary suffering out there because of a combination of factors that I don't have time to get into now. But I do think that I've already said, like, just being kind for yourself. Be kind. This is why I do it. Be kind because you know you made that choice. No matter what a dipshit other people are, you know in your heart that your intent was to be kind. And sometimes the kindest thing is to tell somebody something you know they do not want to hear, because you're giving them the chance to head off, greater consequences if they don't curb their behavior. They can be ragingly pissed at you, but you know that your intention was to be kind. Like, listen to the feedback you're getting, adapt your approach as needed, but you did that out of kindness, and nobody can take that from you. The other thing is learning to listen instead of react. Listening to understand is a critical skill, not so that other people get a turn, so that you feel more centered and in control and less frightened and miserable. Because if you really listen to understand, you're not reading shit in left and right, you'll realize there's a lot less to panic over than you think right now. Trust me, learning to slow down and deal with what a person is actually saying to you, as opposed to what you think they're implying or how they're trying to trap you or all that stuff. Because the truth is, if you agree to a perfectly rational statement here and then they try to scope creep it, you can say no then. It's like, no, I never told you had to apologize. No one's forcing you to apologize. I told you to cut it out. That's totally rational. And if they can't handle it, that's their work to do. You don't have to sit there and go, yeah, you're right. I totally just said cut it out, but I totally meant you had to apologize. Like, hi, Scout. Yeah, Cass never apologized. No, that's not true, Scouty. You're sorry sometimes. But people do that to themselves. And people make asses of themselves all the time, flipping out over something that wasn't said, but they think that someone was nefariously meaning. And okay, sometimes people are, right? But there are ways to strategize, so it don't fucking matter. But the people that did really just mean cut it out, I don't need you to apologize, just don't do it anymore, please, thanks, are gonna go, what the fuck, man? When you start going, I'm not apologizing, I don't like being forced to apologize, my ex made me forced to apologize, I had a problem with that. You're sitting there going, what the fuck? What does your ex have to do? I am not your ex. Oh, wow, this has just gotten weird. Doing that is a choice. Not slowing your goddamn roll and going, wait, what was I actually told? Not what I'm afraid it means. What was I told? It is one thing that you can do that makes your life so much less stressful. Trust me. Yeah, help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Cares session for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/LeannaK, or if you just like to donate to my laptop fund on Coffee, that's greatly appreciated as well. Also, like and subscribe to my channel if you like my content. That's greatly appreciated too. Every bit helps. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.